All right. Um, so Mr. Stephen Smith, thank you so much for being on the DIBS podcast. And you have been given the title, the grandfather of the dad shoe. And for those who maybe don't know who you are, they definitely know your designs. You've worked at New Balance, Reebok, Fila, Nike, Adidas, Yeezy, and now you're at Croc. You started at New Balance in 1986, and some of your iconic creations are the New Balance.
It's 574.
There's my dyslexia there. 574, the New Balance 997, and then the New Balance 1500.
Yeah, and 996.
Nine,
And let's see, 676, 677. There's a 550, the basketball shoe that's like everywhere and ubiquitous, not right now.
well, a lot of those shoes now are so in fashion. I mean, I live in New York now, was born and raised in the suburbs of Chicago, lived in the city for a long time.
Uh,
But walking around New York, every person, every female is in those New Balance. Those dad shoes are like what is in right now. How does it feel that so many years later, those shoes still are so iconic?
it's humbling. Um, I was a 21-year-old kid who just graduated from art school and I needed a job. I ran high school track and I wore New Balances, and at the time, they geared us towards tech and medical devices because that's the businesses that were around us in Boston. Um, and so nobody really designed sneakers at that point. There was a handful of us, and you found out about later that there were like four or five of us in the whole country that were doing it. And um, I heard about this job designing sneakers, and I was like, people design sneakers, and they really didn't at that point. A lot of it was done by pattern makers and old school shoemakers, not true product designers looking to solve a problem and make the product better. Um, so to me, this was, it was really interesting, and it was Reagan era, everybody wearing three-piece suits. I went there and everybody was in this ratty old mill and t-shirts and jeans wearing sneakers. And I'm like, where do I sign? This is the dream. And at that time they still manufactured in the US, which was really cool. That meant a lot to me growing up in an old mill city. Um, so it was pretty cool for my first job. And I was, as time has shown, I was quite prolific. And there were two of us, was the whole design team, myself and a guy named Kevin Brown. And we just cranked out designs, and it was a pretty awesome time frame and time period to kind of define what this would be for a role and what New Balance would be going into the future, not realizing you were doing it. I was just doing my job day in and day out and having some fun. I mean, Brownie and I had a lot of fun. It was a fun place to work. It was, family owned. It still is. Uh, but in those days it was much smaller. Um, and it was cool. There was nothing better than designing something that the everyday person could have and use, and to walk down the street and see people in it is amazing because I try to explain to my friends who really don't, they're not part of the culture per se, but like the world is my art gallery. I can go anywhere and see my art on display on people. And I always am grateful and thankful to them when I see them. Like, oh, that's a nice pair of New Balances you have there. Oh, yeah, thank you. They're kind of flattered by it. And you're like, sometimes I'll tell them, I might have designed that. And they're like, what? Or other times you make them feel nice because it makes you feel nice to see them appreciate your art. And I think that's always one of the things that's been important to me, that my parents put in me, is, to be humble. And um, it's a humbling experience to see someone who spent the money to appreciate your design. And that's what was so fun about it, I think, in those days. It was never like creating icons or knowing that these things would probably outlive me. Um, and so it's a pretty cool thing, you know.
Before I get to my more serious question, I got to ask, you've had so many great shoes over the years, and some of them have some really great names. When you're at New Balance starting out, I know there's nothing really to compare it to. Did the numbering system, when you came up with something particular that you were particularly proud of, which I'm sure you're proud of all of them, but having to just go by the numbers, did that ever frustrate you when you were at New Balance?
Now it was kind of funny because they the numbers at the time, people don't realize that even people with a New Balance don't even know it because it was lore. And it's funny, coming in there at 21, I was the youngest person on the team. So a lot of those people at that time were in their 30s and 40s. People think I'm joking, but I mean, half the people I worked with have passed on right now. It's weird. Um, and the numbers denoted the price point. That's what people don't understand. Like the 1500 was $150 shoe, 990 was the first $100 shoe at $99. So the numbers designated price point. So it made sense. There were other companies that came onto the scene like a Via. They used like 10 this and 35.97, and those were the ones that were kind of confusing to me. And Nike used shoe names named after places in sport or in Oregon, or New Hampshire for that matter, because people don't realize, but Nike's original R&D office was in Exeter, New Hampshire.
I did
Um,
not know that one. No.
yeah, so there's a lot of New England references to the shoe names.
Dog. They talk a lot about that.
Yeah, and it's funny. That's where I think a lot of my knowledge came from, were a lot of these ex-Nike Exeter people who, they called it the buyout, who they were offered a raise and everything to move to Oregon from the East Coast, and a lot of them didn't. They took like a buyout and kind of spread out throughout the companies that were in New England, Saucony, Puma, which, German company, but their office was in the US, Reebok. So you ran across a lot of these Exeter people. So it was interesting to hear the stories of what it was like there in the early days before any of them were really big. We were all kind of competing with each other in a small little pool of talent and business.
So when we think about like the late 80s, early 90s, obviously Nick and I both growing up in Chicago, it's like the Jordan era, and the
Uh-huh.
Air Jordans like really changed the game when it came to sneakers. Do you remember that? And like what was your first impression when you saw the Air Jordans?
Well, it's pretty amazing because the very first Jordans were a lot like all the other basketball shoes at the time, They just it was kind of the first um broad marketed product, with the superstar athlete. Everybody had their athletes. New Balance actually at that point prided themselves on not being endorsed by any particular athlete. It coincided with Jordan's original amazing skills. There really was nobody else like him. I mean, I grew up in the era of Bird and McHale and um, later into Shaq, obviously through Reebok. But yeah, I mean, Jordan was the most amazing thing. He was Superman. He couldn't be stopped. And that was pretty amazing. It was like the perfect storm. There's a lot of these moments in time in our industry where it's this perfect storm of things, and Nike was really good about being in the center of it or even creating it in a lot of ways. And Jordan did that, and Chicago had a, an amazing team, and an amazing roster of players that came through there. I mean, that was fun about being a kid growing up in Boston, is like you had that crazy rivalry between, we had the two best rosters, I think, in the NBA.
I was blessed. I was born in 1982, so when they won their first title, I was 9, and then
Uh,
from that, I basically was the Bulls. My friends and I talk about it as the Bulls were in the championship or the playoffs. Your summer went, school ends, Bulls win NBA championship, rally in Grant Park, 4th of July. That was just the schedule that you had as a kid. But you're talking about how Jordan starts it, but more than the Nike aspect of it, that kind of birthed a whole new, 90s marketing is amazing marketing. It's so much fun to
Oh
go
yeah.
stuff. Which I'm obligated to ask as a child of the 90s, what did you feel about the air pump technology? I saw the Fury Max that you did, which I'm pretty sure I had as a kid. And then after that, I really want to talk to you about the Grant Hill shoe that you did. As again, the child of that time, an NBA fan, I loved Grant Hill. So, but what would you say about the Instamax or the Insta Pump Fury Max?
So the Insta Pump was kind of fun in that, at that time when I joined Reebok, Pump was just about getting ready to launch, and um, they brought us on to start this innovation team that didn't exist before. And when I saw the Pump, I'm like, that's really, that was something really cool. There was the buzz about it. And it's funny, um, connecting back to Chicago, the NSGA show, there used to be Super Show in Atlanta, but then there was also Chicago. So it was those two big shows for the trade shows. And I remember being in Chicago, going to the Nike booth, hearing about the air pressure, but not seeing it, um, going to Reebok's booth, hearing about this thing in basketball that was coming out, because we never really thought of Reebok being basketball at that point. It was women's fitness. Um, and it was pretty revolutionary where this thing came out, because everybody was thinking about new ways to do fit systems. And so when I got to Reebok, it was just about to launch, saw it. It was really cool. It was kind of big and heavy. A lot of the designs at Nike were much more flowing, and there was a beauty to their designs. And then also to New Balance, we were very technical, but there was beauty blended in with the technical side of it. But then Reebok was just, there was always something a little different about the designs. I can't say good, bad, just different. And so when the pump came out, it was different, but it was still technical because it worked. Um, and when I got there, I saw that thing. I'm like, wow, this is really cool. And, myself and Paul Litchfield looked at it and we're like, we're spending all this money on this pump bladder, and then we're spending all this money building this shoe, and you stick them all together and you put this thing inside of this conventional shoe. Why are we doing that? Why don't we just make it the shoe? And that's when we sat down and had a midsole, and we had the pump bladder. We just kind of wrapped it on a last. We're like, there's our shoe. And we showed it to Paul Fireman. And he was like, oh, yeah, go do it. And we're like, oh, snap. Now we actually have to do this shit. So we just embarked on this way to make this thing, the pump bladder, to be the shoe. And that's kind of where the Fury was born from. And I was bored in this meeting, and I did this little sketch of what the air bladder might look like. So there was all this, like, again, it's that perfect storm of things where the Viper had come out. I was way into the Pistols and punk rock and the colors, and triathletes were big. Brew had this mountain bike, a road bike that was kind of like magenta with neon yellow. And there was this New Balance shoe that I always wanted as a kid called the Super Comp that looked like your feet were on fire.
Nice.
So I was in this bored ass meeting, and I started to sketch this thing, and I was like, that's it. And I slid it over and showed it to Lich, and we're like, let's go make it. So we basically had this vision of a concept car of all these different technologies, and why don't we put it all together and make it a showcase for everything Reebok's capable of from the innovation side. And in the normal concept car way of things, they show it at a trade show, and then the regular designers pick bits and pieces out of it, and it comes in to inform the language for the brand. But we actually had the endorsement from Paul Fireman to go forward with this thing, like build that, which you never really get to see. There's instances of it, like the Viper. The Viper was a concept vehicle for a reimagined Shelby Cobra, since Shelby was working at Dodge.
Viper. I remember the television show about the Viper, and looking
Yeah.
at your shoe designs. I can see when you mention it, that kind of attitude with it. You're kind of hitting around something I really did want to ask you about. You did
Uh-huh.
the shoe with Grant Hill, but not so much just the shoe itself, but when you're going to design a shoe with a particular athlete in mind, with the technology that's evolving, plus you want it to have distinctiveness and it has to function well. How do you personally go and balance form and function, technology, and our artistry to make the shoe what you want it to be? Because that it seems like this is around the time period where your style really start, and probably it was just also opportunity, but your style starts to become a lot more personal. So I'm curious how you decide between those four how to make a shoe.
Yeah, I think part of it is confidence level as you rose up through the design world, and you were giving, they always say power is given and power is taken. At that point, power was starting to be given to me to drive the design more, as opposed to as a young kid coming in and, people are questioning you, you got to prove yourself. And I think at that point, getting that role of design director for innovation at Reebok, it kind of gave you that authority and power to drive it more from 100% perspective from what you envisioned it to be. Um, and I think that was that moment in time. And part of, again, was a very Bauhaus way of thinking about the product. Form would follow function, and function came first, and the athlete was at the center of that. And the Fury, as radical as it is, and it became this mainstay of lifestyle for Reebok, was rooted in performance. I mean, that carbon fiber arch piece, the super soft midsole, the pump fit was a way of reduction, take away parts, make it as light as possible, make an amazing technological product for the everyday runner. And by putting that carbon fiber arch piece in there, we were able to take away a third of the midsole, which took away a third of the weight of material that you didn't need. The carbon fiber was coming on as a radical new material from the space age, and it gave you that lightweight structure. So we were able to replace that big chunk of your arch, which is normally, supported by a piece of structure, with this really cool space age structural material. And so I think all of those things, again, it was that perfect moment of things that came together to create something. And I always had this um, belief that you should always make the best thing that you possibly can. And I had this vision for the future, and I made the future that I wanted to see. And I think that carried forth later in with Ye, was that we built the future we wanted to see, that we were always let down by the corporate world and the system, where everything was petered out for sales and profit, and we just built the dream. And that's what that shoe was to me. It was the dream, because so many people criticized it, like, how can you afford all these expensive materials in the thing? And I'm like, well, we went from almost 200 parts down to 25. So now those 25 parts can be higher value and higher quality materials for the final product. And I think that was a lesson in itself for a lot of people to understand. You didn't have to be stuck in convention. And I think that's where I think we're at a phase right now in the industry as a whole where we're stuck in safe and convention. With Yeezy, with Ye, we kind of push the envelope on what people would see as viable product. And I think there was as the business imploded for us, there was a sigh of relief from like Nike and Adidas. Whew, we don't have to work as hard with radical new things, because we were the point of the spear that everybody else drafted off of. And without us gone, there was nobody to react to. And so they all kind of stood back and took a deep breath. So
So
I-
I definitely want to talk to you about Yeezy. You started working with Ye in 2016. Obviously, he is Chicago. Um, Chicago loves him. I grew up loving him. I was at all the shows. I'm sure I've been at shows where you've been there,
Mhm.
like All-Star Weekend and for Donda at Soldier Field that started like 3 hours late. But either way, you really want, you both wanted to kind of disrupt, but also do things your way. And you together came out, I would say, with some of the most iconic sneakers like in streetwear that you can think of in the last decade, 20 years. I am very lucky. I own almost all of them that you've designed, and love them. But can we talk about how the 700 Wave Runner really came to be? And then I definitely want to talk about the 451, which is, some people say, is like your most audacious like shoe you ever designed.
Yeah, it's funny when I first joined him, I was working at Keen and I quit one day because I'm like, this isn't for me anymore. I just can't do this. The owner and I, who are still really good friends, we just had a weird philosophical disagreement at that moment in time, and I was like, I can't do this right now, and I walked out, and I really didn't know what I was going to do, and then out of the blue, EA calls me. And I was like, what do you want me for? Right? And he's like, well, you designed all the shoes I wanted as a kid. Who wouldn't want that guy designing their sneakers for them? I said, fair enough. So for the first like 7 months, I couldn't even talk about what I was doing. It was like the CIA, where I was working. I had to sign all these NDAs and secrecy agreements. But when I got there, they were sketching on this kind of retro vibe dad shoe. And he's like, who better to do it than the guy who kind of created the category? I'm like, yeah, yeah, cool. And so I started sketching on this thing, and we pushed it here, pushed it there, collected different imagery. I kept doing him sketches, and he had a young Chinese kid who would Photoshop the thing and twist it and morph it and send it back to me. And I'd be like, what's this? And I'd redraw it and send it back and redraw it. And we did a bunch of sketching for a couple of weeks, but then there was this one weekend where he sent me this thing and I redrew it. I sent it back, and we stayed awake for nearly 48 hours straight, passing sketches back and forth through emails. And out of it came that shoe. And it was a pretty amazing process because it was like nothing I had ever done before. And when people came to work at Yeezy, they either got it or they didn't. A lot of them didn't get it. There was a handful of us that did. We're like, this isn't the way I've done it before, but let's see what happens. This is an interesting new process. And so many other people would come in like, this isn't the way you do it. And then be like, okay, there's the door. That's the way you do that. See it and be gone. But you kind of soaked it up, and to me it was fascinating because it was a different process, a different tool, a different methodology. And I think it expanded my view of product creation, and the Wave Runner was that, where again, I've said in other interviews where you look at it and you go, is it retro? Is it futuristic? When is it from? Is it from yesterday, today, tomorrow? Yes, it's from all of that. You don't really know. It's like you see it, of course it always existed, right? Even though it came out, we designed it in 2016, came out in 2017, but you're like, of course, there it is. And it's hard to explain.
No,
And
it is that based on how you've been talking about some of your design processes, it feels like to me, some people would hear 48 hours straight and they take that as being like almost crazy. And I have had that creative thing where your brain is going so fast creatively that sleep is not an option. Your brain won't
yeah,
let literally have to get it from your brain to, I'm assuming when you're at that point, you're using pen and paper and it's
yeah,
as fast as you can think it. You're trying to get it. And it's always in gaming, they call it one more turn. It's just, all right, I almost got it. No, it's not there yet. That seems to me to be a lot of your energy when you're going through this. Is that something that you find? Is it a curse and a blessing when you're working like that? Do you feel?
yeah, because you want it right, and then who's it right to is always one of the questions. And I'm like, well, yeah, and it was always hard to give things up. And that's one of Ye's good and bad things is like it seems like it's never done, but at some point there's a business need, and that's where working in a corporation, you have the business need where you have to give it up and go, this is it at this moment in time. It doesn't mean it's 100% done or what you really would have loved. But that's part of working in the corporate world. And at the end of the day, we were tied to Adidas in the corporate world to release something different. And that's what we did. And I mean, I agonize that over that all the time, where your brain's racing, like just one more turn, or if oh, that line's just a little wonky. And I think that's what that drive to that is what makes my designs different, because they look complete. They always look complete. They look resolved, no matter what angle you turn it from. And I look back at those New Balance ones, and I'm like, yeah, it was the same thing back then. And again, part of it was that transition from a 2D drawing to a 3D form, that you had to give it up to the pattern maker or the mold maker to take your drawings, and it left some room for interpretation, and you're like, no, this is it. And then you'd get it back and you'd rework it. And now everything's in 3D, and you don't have that same experience. Sometimes when you're drawing something, you did the side view, the top down view, the back view. And when the thing would come together in three-dimensional form in front of you, there was either some spot where you're like, ugh, or there's another spot where something magical happened as the line transferred around the back of the shoe, that it's in a three-quarter view that you never visualize till you have it in front of you. And I think a lot of that's missing in some of the digital creation today. Was that craftsmanship, that hands-on, the artisanship of the pattern makers and mold makers working together with them as a creative collective, because without them you can't make the product. But I think those things helped me in how I designed, and I think it definitely helped with the Wave Runner. There's not really any bad angles when you turn it around. It was resolved. And materials and things evolved as we developed it, because there were some scuba materials and things on it that eventually got changed to meshes to make it more breathable, and function entered the chat at that point.
So when you talk about craftsmanship, one of the shoes that, like I said, when you read up about it, they talk about it's one of your most like audacious designs. The Yeezy 451. I've never seen a shoe like that. I own it. I don't wear it as much because it's just like, I want to keep it nice, but it's such a unique blend of material, and how it came about, because there's like hard plastic but then soft mesh, and the way it forms to your foot, it's just like such a unique shoe. And I remember the debate when that shoe came out. People were like,
What
is
is
it a
that?
looking shoe? What is this? Like, I remember I had it shipped to my parents' house versus in Chicago, because I didn't want like the package stolen. And I
Yeah.
opened it up and my dad was like, what is that? I'm like, a shoe. He's like, what? Like, and he's a lover of like New Balance. But he was like, what? I'm like, well, the guy who designed your favorite shoe also designed this. And he's like, couldn't put the two together. Can you talk about how that design came? Because it's so different than the dad shoe or some of the other shoes that you've designed.
Well, it's really funny. It goes back to your earlier question of coming into my own and my aesthetic. That shoe goes back to a sketch I did at Reebok in 1993. And Ye saw it in my sketchbook. It was like, what is that? And I was like, well, it was this idea I had. If you can visualize it now, if you take the last or the shoe form, let me see where my skeleton is here. Basically, I had this vision back then of your hands holding your foot in place, and you see where the fingers come, how this comes up around your heel, these come across the midfoot and up into the toe. It's literally like a pair of hands hugging your foot. And that's what the original sketch was based on. And that combined with flames, and I think the original name of that one, my working name was, that one I think was the Mystery Machine. I used to give them funny code names so that when they would go over to the factory to be developed, nobody would be interested in it. Like, what the hell? That can't be anything important. It's got a stupid name, like the van from Fred from Scooby Doo.
Or they,
Um,
or
but it was a good way to disguise what you were working on. And so that was the origin of that one. And we made it originally an injected EVA to push the envelope of what injection EVA could be made in. And it was a little more clumsy and blocky. And I have some of the first prototypes I had made of that, and it never went anywhere. And he saw it and was like, let's make all those things you always wanted to do. And so that one came out, but people don't realize that, like, it's that old. That design was that vintage, and we just perfected it and modernized it. And then when it came to Adidas working on it, they couldn't figure out how to make it in the process I originally envisioned, so we did the direct attach, which the things foamed into place on that upper. And it's kind of fun when you pull the last or the foot form out, the thing just kind of collapses like that, and it looks more like a creature than a sneaker anymore. A lot of people said it looked like a dumpling, but it's very funny. It was one of my favorites because it's so simple, yet it's very complex to make, and that's the beauty of a good design. When you see it, it looks so easy and simple to have made, yet it's very complex to get you what you wanted for the customer.
the when you have a design like that and it gets the different sides of, some people love it and then you have the other people making fun of it. I remember when Yeezys came out, you had the whole late night scene where people are cracking jokes. What's your reaction to it? Is it any news is good news, or do you take it personally when people are coming at it that aggressively? What was your reaction to the national, let's call it, fervor around the Yeezys?
I mean, it's a little tough, but it's polarizing. That's the beauty of good disruption. The Fury, people were like, "What the hell is that thing?" when that came out. I mean, you got to remember, I sketched that thing in like 92, 91, and it finally came out in 94. And even then, even today, people are like, "What is that thing?" There's no laces, blah 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 blah. I mean, that's one of the things when you see something that is kind of from the future, you don't recognize it originally. Um, and I mean, it was very funny. You think of like the 450, 451, the Fury. You know, Ye's nickname for me was the alien design god from the future. He's like, you saw the future and you brought it to the people. They were just too stupid to realize it was right in front of them 20 years ago. It's kind of funny when you think about it. And I don't know, you have to view it like that. It's like, oh, it upsets you. Good, you know? And but if it's rooted, there's a lot of things that people do, like the mischief shoes, for example, that are just disruptive, but it's almost borderline silly, and that's their method of disruption. At least mine are always been rooted in performance and comfort. And there's authenticity hidden behind the audacity of the designs. But that's the beauty of taking you to a new place. I mean, like a Cybertruck, for example, right? You see that thing and people are like, what the fuck? And it's stupid or it's different or it's that. People who drive them are douchebags. But then if you see it next to a conventional car or truck, you're like, of course, it's the future. Nothing, once you see that, you can't look at a regular old pickup truck and go, yeah, that's new and futuristic. I mean, honestly, I mean, whether you love it or hate it, it's the future, and you just saw it. You got a glimpse of it. It's alien. It's new. It's disruptive. Um, anyway, that's my philosophy, and it kind of that's a current example that I think people can relate to.
So,
It's always going to look futuristic for what the marketplace it was plopped into.
so obviously, like throughout your career, sneakers have become a culture within itself. When I
Mhm.
think about Chicago, there's like St. Alfred. Obviously, there's RSVP Gallery that was started by Virgil. You have Leaders 1350, 1340, 1354. Can you tell it's a Friday? And then you also have like Boneyard. These are iconic shoe stores. When you're traveling, do you go to some of these places and when you walk in, like, and you see the wall of sneakers, what do you feel? Because obviously some of your designs are on that iconic wall and people are spending
A
hundreds
lot of my designs are on those walls.
on a pair.
It's pretty cool. It's funny that I think the funny thing is going in there and having them not realize who's standing in front of them, the guy who designed half the shoes on their wall that they're reselling. That's even more entertaining. They're like, "Oh, you're interested in some Yeezys?" Like, I'm like, "Yeah, a little bit. Tell me about them." And Boneyard is cool. I like Top Fashion in Naperville, and they're really good guys. Chicago's got a great scene. Um, Wicker Park. My friends have some restaurants there with Peace Pizza that I like to visit every time I come.
So
Um,
I heard you're a fan of Peace, and that was my Sunday spot. Lived
nice.
in Wicker. I lived in Westtown, but like I was there almost every Sunday. Shout out to Patrick, the bartender, who allowed me to put Sound of Music on a Sunday at the bar. But I always love Peace. They are so good. And when I go back to Chicago, I always make sure I stop there.
Yeah, again, we would go there for the trade show, for the big NSGA show to Chicago quite frequently. Um, and then, with Nike, obviously, but it was really Ye and his squad that brought me to spend much more time there, with Don C and Rhymefest. And I really grew to like Chicago a lot. I love coming there. And then he moved us there, in 2019 when he was there with Chance and got up on the stage. It was like, "I'm moving to Chicago and I'm never leaving," we're like, "Oh, okay." And then my plane ticket changed from Burbank to Chicago overnight. And I'm like, "All right, looks like I'm going to Chicago now." But it was fun. It was a good time. And we tried to bring some business there. And we did. We brought a lot of business there and spent a lot of good times there, and I still love to come back. I've made a lot of friends there, so I like to come back. I was there this summer for the NASCAR race, which was cool with Abnar Farrakhan. I'll probably go back again this year. Um, what a great event to watch them run down the streets of Chicago, and just the sound of it echoing through the buildings was amazing. But I like it. I like it there a lot. Uh,
I understand you also love music, so Chicago's a great
oh,
like
absolutely.
for that as well.
Oh yeah, and again, that's what drew me to Peace, because Peace is owned by Rick Nielsen from Cheap Trick from Rockford, and I spent a lot of time in Rockford and Marengo, oddly enough, because we had a mold shop that was in Marengo, Illinois, and I would conveniently Cheap Trick was doing a show in Marengo, so I'd go catch them in a little club, and I just like Chicago. I mean, the blues, how can you go wrong? So many great bands come out of there. The latest ones, Poison Boys, they're awesome. They're throwback punks from the 90s, which I like. And then again, the blues, you can't go wrong.
Have you gone and done?
It's funny that each city and each region has its own vibe to it. Growing up in Boston, there was an edge to all of it. Del Fuegos, John Butcher Axis, Aerosmith, some great amazing bands, and then Detroit with the Stooges and MC5 with definitely a much nastier edge to it all with the Motor City, and then Chicago somewhere in between with just the influence of all of it. So I mean, I love all music, and each city has its own magic.
If you get the chance, you should check out in June if you're here. The Blues Fest is an amazing music fest they do. It's a free thing in the city. They do 3 stages. It's a Chicago institution. It's one of the best weekends the city does. It's usually right around when it starts to finally get warm and the people just come out. You can picnic. It is a hell of a time with just really great blues musicians all lined up on the street too, playing on amps to get tips and stuff like that. You should check out Blues Fest if you're into the blues.
Yeah, I should definitely come out. I like I said, I'll be back quite frequently with Rhymefest winning his place on the school board. He wants me to come out and give a career talk to a bunch of the city high school kids to encourage them that anything's possible. My friend Chris owns Naperville Running Company, so I like to come visit him as well over in Naperville. Uh, you guys got one of the greatest um, concentrations of Frank Lloyd Wright buildings, so I love to come for that. The new Bauhaus ended up being there, so a lot of great architecture. Chicago's an awesome city. I love coming there. All-Star Game was amazing when we were in the Sherps. I was in one of the Sherps driving around down Lake Street and everything, and
I
of
remember
course it was
that.
cold, but it was awesome.
Yeah, I remember that. I saw one of them. And then I also went to Sunday service.
Oh yeah, that was an
It
epic one at the college.
was amazing. And that was like the last big weekend before the world shut down.
Yeah. Yep.
But that was a great weekend, and Chicago definitely did a great job with the All-Star game. And it was also fun to have like that Sunday service pop up that weekend.
Yeah, it was really cool. It was very funny because he had that mud stage, and then poor Cesar and I helped him. We had to clean all the shoes off after that the choir had on in that muck. But it was pretty neat to be right there with Wex and Monop right next to the stage, watching it. It was pretty epic moment.
Yeah, the one thing is I kept being like, where's the merch? Like, where's the
Yeah,
Sunday service merch during NBA All-Star game? Like, come on. Yay.
should have had it. I don't know. I was, the biggest thing at the time was debuting the Quantums, and it was kind of funny because we were driving through downtown and the kids mobbed us where we couldn't even move. I was 6 inches in the Sherps at that point, but we drove by the big Fear of God launch with Jerry, and even Jerry came out to see what the hell was going on. And some of these kids took their Fear of God basketball Nikes right off their feet and were
And
like,
I
trade
saw
him, trade
that.
him, trade him for the Quantums. It was kind of funny, but we totally played Nike at their own game. They love this whole guerrilla marketing, and we did it in Chicago's home turf.
They like they like corporate, very clean corporate guerrilla marketing. They don't like actual guerrilla marketing where actual fun can happen. There's a very
Oh yeah, we fucked shit up driving those things around unannounced. People were like, "What are we getting invaded by the Russians? What is this stuff?" It was cool.
You happen
It
to
was
remember where you were at in the city when that was going down? I'm sorry. I'm just curious. I
like
want what?
they were on like Lake Street. They went like into like the West Loop, and then they actually like went down Wicker. It was like more, it was great. It was
Those
wild.
streets are
Yeah,
tight.
there were two groups of five of us,
If you're getting
and then
mobbed
I
on
was
that kind of a street, it's intense. That's just I'm picturing that. That had to be that Beatles treatment is fun, I think, for about 5 minutes, I would imagine, and then it just gets scary.
yeah, I was out, with Quavo was in the one in front of me, and we were we went on the south side and then came into the city, and I was hanging out the hatch. I wouldn't call it a sunroof, but out the hatch, shooting video, sending it real time to my Instagram of what was going on, and it was pretty cool. The kids were stoked because here was this unreleased shoe, and like here we're just handing them out for free.
Yeah.
So pretty amazing time. I had so much fun.
So you left Yeezy, and that was a very big thing in the shoe and fashion world. And now you're a Croc. And I Crocs have been around for so long. They've kind of had a resurgence a little bit, but it's again that kind of shoe that people look at and go, are those good looking? Are they not? Are they comfortable? Like, what are they kind of? What made you decide to come on board to Croc?
It's funny. The minute I left Yay, they were kind of one of the first to reach out. I talked to about 5 different companies, but I liked the smaller nature of the company, streamlined bureaucracy, and what they offered was pretty amazing. Of like, we're going to give you free control to create. Who do you need? And so I said, I need a small team, just these guys. And it's very anti-corporate because they're expecting you to build people love to come in and be insecure and build an empire within the corporation and surround themselves with these bodies to protect themselves. Like, I don't care. I just want to do cool shit for a cool company and create the future. And I said, I want as small a team as possible, and their eyes get that big because everybody wants to blow budget and come in with big money to spend. I'm like, I don't want to. I want to keep it tight and clean. I saw what it could be. I saw what you could do with a small SWAT team, basically. And that's what we're going to do on the innovation side. So it's almost like an extension of how we operated at Yeezy, where it's a very tight group of us, and we banged out amazing ideas that disrupted things. And that's what they want. They know that they can make the leap. And their CEO definitely believes in the possibility of what we could do. And then if you think about it, one of the companies I had been talking peripherally to was Nike about going back, but it wasn't for me in the end. I wasn't even back in the door, and I was already frustrated and pissed off with the bureaucracy and human resources and the system. Crocs doesn't have a system like that.
Nike is
And
my dream companies to work for as a marketer. And I've heard a lot of mixed things about people's experiences.
I
But
mean,
as
there's amazing things about it, but then, I can't be a minor cog.
We
I
who work with Valerie like to go out of our way to tell her that she is a champion and a boss. And so she can go to Nike and learn stuff, but eventually she's going to be a senator or president or a CEO of a Fortune 3 company. So the rest of it is just learning until she decides to take her place as queen.
Well, you think of the Dante's Inferno quote,
yeah,
other than rule in hell and serve in heaven. And I think that's the way a lot of it is. I mean, I don't mean that in an analogy that Crocs is bad, but it's much better to go in and make a bigger impact in a smaller company than to go be another cog back at a big corporation where you're just responsible for this much when you can do this much now.
yeah.
And Nike stock is in the toilet. It's
Yeah, it is.
killing me because my retirement's tied to it. I'm never going to get to
Stocks
fucking
go up.
retire
I
at
have
this
some
point.
shares. I look at the market every day. I have some shares in Nike. It's
I think
slowly climbing.
Yeah,
Fox-
but it was at 130,
Yeah, and
and
that's like
my
today.
401k was cut in half
Yeah.
at 72. Okay, so Crocs had a little blip because of Hey Dude's numbers, because they acquired Hey Dude. They had one bad quarter, so the stock took a dip. And I think of what my impact could have been on Nike in a dream environment and, fantasy of rainbows and unicorns. If you thought me and Tinker, the two acknowledged goats back at the brand, would have been amazing. But then the reality of what it was like to go back into that corporate monster hit and the fog blew away. And I'm like, I'm already unhappy and I'm not back. But the day my position was announced at Crocs, their stock went up $13 a share. I mean, you think if I had that impact on Crocs, what impact would that announcement have had on Nike? And they need
Without
it right
doubt.
now,
Yeah, without a doubt. Because you are such an innovator. And like you said, you really do see the future. And I have a feeling what you're kind of expressing is to go into such a big corporation where you don't get to innovate freely, where you're kind of bogged down and have such a small area when you know what you can actually bring to the table. And to go to a brand like Crocs where you can reinvent it and expand it and test things out. And they're giving you pretty much, I don't want to say blank check, but
free
like,
reign.
yeah, do what you do. We don't want to mess up that formula. I
Yeah.
would think that is a innovator's dream. At least for me, like I would love if someone's like, do what you do and we'll support you. We're not gonna like interfere.
Yeah, it's an absolutely. And if you can go to a smaller company like that and make an impact and potentially double the size of it, why wouldn't they want you to come there? Why wouldn't they give you free reign? Because I did it. Together with Ye, I got to Yeezy. It was $350 million business. By the time I left, we were almost at 3 billion. And the root of the designs was this partnership between he and I creating these things, you know, the essence, the seeds of what would become these products. And it's like, who wouldn't want that? You know, I mean, it's tenfold, right?
I've
Why wouldn't you want to do that?
100%. I've come to realize as I'm getting older that it's not so much that like there's a status symbol, right? I'm at Nike, I'm at the big deal, but you get a little bit older, you're like, I just want to enjoy my job. I don't want to have to answer to people who don't know what they're talking about when I'm the expert in the field. Or not even the expert in the field, just I'm competent. You don't have to be
Yeah.
on.
Look at my track record.
It
That's
feels
the thing. It's like,
feels like to me you also were looking for a challenge. Is sort of the diehard, Alexander wept for the no more world to conquer. Like you did everything, and now you got the challenge of taking a brand that somewhat maligned over the years for being, so generic and whatever else, and kind of rebuild it. That has to be a challenge that you were almost looking for without even knowing, I would imagine.
I think to me is it's not necessarily rebuild it, but it's expand who they are and who they can be. And I think that was the opportunity. You don't want to go in and change them because they are who they are. That's their DNA. And that's what I've always brought to every brand. I never went, no, this brand is me, because it's not. That's why people always ask me, like, why don't you go do your own company or whatever? Like, I don't want to. I like helping other companies. I like having their resources at my command, per se, right? Um, but I'm also cognizant of their DNA, of who they are and who they could be. You don't want to destroy who they are, because that's who they are. But you can expand it and grow it as opposed to displace it. You don't want to displace it, because so many other companies have failed where people come in, want to put their stamp on it, and they change the entire direction of the company and then ruin it because they confuse the consumer. I mean, look at Fila, look at K-Swiss. They've confused people. They don't know who they are anymore. Because they left their core consumer. So always be cognizant of that core customer and what people expect from them, but delight and surprise them with something new, as opposed to change the entire course of the brand, because that's not going to get you anywhere, because now you've lost all the people who brought you to where you are. I think that's an important perspective to have. Like, I'm additive, I'm like whipped cream on the top of a pie. You don't get rid of the pie and have just a plate of whipped cream, right? It's an additive to it. It's like barbecue sauce.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for chatting with us. I feel like we could probably pick your brain about shoes all day. We end with like a speed round of questions, and I'm going to throw an extra question in there just for you because I'm
Okay.
curious. But real fast, Cubs or Sox?
Uh, I like the White Sox because I like the logo.
Oh,
And
that's
I like where it meant in the street. And I'm a Red Sox guy anyway, but I don't know. I've gotten kind of
that works. Um,
leaning towards the Sox.
tavern style pizza or deep dish?
I growing up on the East Coast, we didn't have a lot of deep dish. So when you had it, you went to like Pizzeria Uno, which was the mass market one. But I like them both. But I'm kind of partial to the thinner one. That's why I like Peace. Uh,
Yeah. Ketchup on a hot dog, yes or no?
no, absolutely not.
All right.
Ever.
Favorite neighborhood in Chicago?
Ooh, burb or
Let's
city
let's say
within?
city. City.
I mean, I like hanging downtown along the river, but I also like Wicker Park because it's got that quirkiness to all of it. Those are
Yeah.
my two faves, I think.
Favorite season in Chicago?
Summer was pretty awesome this year.
Yeah.
Uh, Winter, it was funny when Kanye moved us all there. It was getting close to November, and I was like, please God, let him change his mind so that we'll go back to Southern California before real winter hits. And sure enough, he did. The prayers were answered thanks to Sunday service. But
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up in Boston, so I know what real cold is. But there's something nice to the cleanliness of the air and that brisk cold. But I guess you guys have been having a pretty gnarly one for lows this year. Um, But
Yeah.
summer's definitely great to see the city alive and
It's just
vibrant.
too
It was
sunny.
pretty epic summer.
And
Every time
then
sunny is the perfect day in Chicago. It always is.
Yeah.
why do you love Chicago?
I like it because New York's old and dirty, LA's new and dirty. Chicago is somewhere in between in the scale and the size, and it's a great city. Everything's there. It's a great foodie site. Um, all my experience have been great. Great culture, great art, great museums, great architecture. Having the river go through the middle is pretty amazing. All the bridges, it's a feast for the eyes. It's a great city, and there's a lot of great people.
And then the last question, which is just for you, is out of all of your iconic shoes, which one is your favorite?
Oh boy, it's like
Your
asking for your favorite child. Um, I think the Wave Runner was an important one for sure. The Fury, just because the Fury's been this acknowledged thing from the future, it's to me that one was as big as the New Balances are. That one was the groundbreaking one that ended up in the Smithsonian and the London Design Museum. It ended up in Domus, which at the time I was going to art school, that we got that design magazine from Italy. It was like $50 an issue. You saved every penny you could to get each new issue, or you hit the library to see if you could read it. And 94, when that shoe was launched, it was in Domus, and to me, like, I had made it, because that was the architecture and design magazine center for the world. So to that one, that one meant a lot to me.
Well, thank you again so much for chatting with us and being such a fan of the account. And we just really appreciate you talking with us today.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
I'll be back. I got to talk to Rhymefest and figure out when I'm coming.